So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Our talk tonight is Unencumbered by Baggage. I'm Michael Dalton. I've been practicing bioenergy healing and running a school of bioenergy healing for over 30 years. Initially in Ireland, and then the last almost 18 years in Canada, in Vancouver. And these webinars were, after 30 years of offering bioenergy, I decided to put some webinars together to share some of the wisdom and some of the knowledge behind bioenergy. I think one of the things is that, you know, there's so much stuff, right? There's so much learning and there's so much to learn in life. And I often, when I run workshops and courses, it's like, there's so much you want to give people, and the webinars are just a way to share some of that wisdom and some of that knowledge. Some of it is from the courses, some of it is kind of stuff that we don't get into on the courses or don't have time for. So you kind of get a feel into different things that we talk about in the bioenergy. In terms of our talk tonight, Unencumbered by Baggage, I don't know, I love this word unencumbered. I've always loved it. I'm not exactly sure why, but it was originally a teacher I followed, a wonderful guy, a Jesuit priest called Anthony de Mello. And he wrote a book called Awareness by Anthony de Mello. And I think that took me off on my spiritual journey 30 years ago. This amazing book, Awareness by Anthony de Mello. And then he wrote another book called Unencumbered by Baggage. And I loved that title. And I think over the years, like his wisdom, his teachings kind of like went deep into my soul. And I think the reason being is, in the process of bioenergy, I always try to bring things back to the simplicity of things, the simplicity of healing, the simplicity when we get out of the way. And to me, really, that's what unencumbered is. It's like no burdens, it's burdenless, it's unburdened, right? So unencumbered by baggage. And what's the baggage? Well, you know, we tend to pick up emotional baggage and mental baggage on our life journey, you know, not to mention the stuff that we come in with. You know, on one level, we're born with as these babies with pure innocence, you know, so we're born into this world as babies with pure innocence. But then at the same time, we take on the DNA of our parents, of our grandparents, of our ancestors. And the process of life is a purification process of bringing and dissolving the unconscious into consciousness. And so it's one of the ways in which I think, like, we heal our wounds and we heal the wounds of our ancestors, is that if you were to imagine that we're all like powerful spiritual beings beyond time and space, and we make this decision to come into life, into this physical life, into this physical body. First of all, like, why would we come into a body? Well, just to know what ice cream tastes like. That's my thought, right? Like, so that we can have senses, so that we can feel and smell and taste and hear in a different way than we might do as an infinite, powerful spiritual being. So we limit ourselves and we drop our vibration down into the physical experience so that we can experience pleasure and joy and the magic that is life. But what comes with that is the duality. So we also experience pain and suffering and hardship. And in some ways we get to experience the duality, like all the things, you know. I always speak to that term, all the things, you know, and sometimes we only want to experience the good stuff, you know. And in my level 2 training, I always shared with people that, you know, people are like tea bags, you know. I know Jenny's what, a tea bag? You know, it's only when we're dipped in hot water that we get to see what we're made of, you know. And so the hot water infuses the tea and brings out the the flavor and brings out what the tea is. I mean, you try drinking a cup of tea without water, right? First of all, and then you try drinking some tea with cold water, not so much iced tea, but just like when you put hot water on tea, it infuses the tea and it brings out from within the tea, that which you wouldn't have been able to have contact with without the water. So like you have the tea in the bag or the tea in the leaves, but without the water, you can't really drink it. You can't really taste it. So the water is the contact between you being able to experience the tea. Does that make sense? So now here we are. Well, why would I, as a powerful, infinite spiritual being, give up all of that bliss and all to experience physical life? Well, your physical body is like the water. The physical body is your connection to earth. It allows you to be here. It allows you to interact with people. It allows you to tap in and use your senses. It allows you to have experiences. And I think like, in terms of like, if you think of yourself as a powerful spiritual being, then we're also beyond time and space. We're infinite beings. So then like coming into this life, it's like a blip. It's like a dot, And so when we come into this life, we, it's kind of like, I think sometimes like you're on the precipice of like, we'll just say you're connecting with God, with the God energy. And God says, hey, would you like to go down to the carnival? Would you like to go down to the circus and have an experience? And you're like, well, what's the carnival? What's the circus? And you're like, well, it's this experience where you go down and you lose memory of who you are and you get to experience all these different things. And you're like, what? That sounds great, and God says, yeah, well, it is great, but it's also hard because you're going to forget who you are. And it's like, well, can I just go and remember who I am and only experience good stuff? And God says, well, no, you got to, the experience itself is all of the things. You got to experience all of it as much as you can. And so, but it's only for a blip, such a short time in the infinite time. And then for some crazy reason, being adventurous or something, we're like, okay, I'll give it a go. And then we like come out as these little babies, forgetting everything of who we are, but with this pure innocence, but also this capacity to grow and experience and learn. And so all of these things are infused in the life experience. Now, I think that there's another part though too, where there's humanity, and within that humanity, there's what we might call the raising of consciousness. So like as humanity evolves, consciousness raises, the unconscious becomes conscious. People become aware of their pain and suffering and their shadow, and they rise above it. So just like, life can be difficult, you have the capacity, to be able to move beyond that, to expand beyond that. And so if we were to think of like, well, not only do we get to come and experience the carnival and the circus, maybe we've also came to experience bringing more consciousness, more light into the planet, and so, prior to that coming in, like as light beings, we get the opportunity to look, as you go into this life experience, yeah, you will forget who you are. But as you start remembering and returning to your lightness, you're going to bring that lightness to other people. You're going to illuminate. And when, the goal is to illuminate yourself within the carnival, within the circus. And then when you illuminate, you'll find other illuminaries. And you'll start to connect, and you'll start to remember together. You'll start to share together. You start to open up together. And as you do that, you're starting to shift the collective consciousness from the unconscious into consciousness. And that process we might call awakening, we might call enlightenment. And so that's the journey of the circus and the carnival that we're on, you know. So in terms of healing, of course, if we wanted to contribute to the greater good, and we say, well, okay, well, how can we contribute healing or wellness or our light or our illumination to the collective? Well, how we would do that, of course, is to just do it within our own families, to be born into a family and to bring more light, more love, not less. So within your dynamic, within your network, that you come in and you don't need to go looking for your wounds, they'll find you. Isn't that true? Like your wounds will find you, your stuff will come looking for you. You know, patterns have a way of repeating themselves. In bioenergy, we say everything moves in energy, waves, rhythms, patterns, and cycles. So, you know, people often say, well, why is this pattern coming up again? Well, that's what patterns do. The same as like the ocean comes in and out, we've sunrise and sunset, you know. So we have days, we have weeks, we have months, we have seasons. And so things are seasonal. You know, we might plant food in spring and then harvest it in the summer and then eat it during the winter. And there's these cycles that take place. Well, the pattern of cycles really applies to everything, because everything in our world moves in these energy waves, rhythms, patterns, and cycles. And so even for us, if you notice on your journey, right, like I think the first part of awakening is identifying the role that you're playing in your life. Like, and I think that begins with realizing that the very thoughts and feelings that you have are influencing your life in some way. Isn't that true? Like you begin to notice like the things that you're thinking are happening in your life. The things that you're feeling are showing up in your life, or how you think and how you feel is affecting your own physical body. And you start becoming aware that life isn't just happening to you, life is happening with you. That in this carnival and circus, it's interactive. It's not that you're separate from the experience, you're also part of the experience. And so as we go through this process of life and we start to notice, like when I first noticed it, it was actually with sessions, would you believe it? It was actually, I had a clinic and I was doing bioenergy sessions. And some days like I was super busy and I was thinking, oh, I'd love to have some time off. And then literally the phone would ring or something and someone would reschedule or cancel. And I just kind of dismissed it, you know, as like, oh, that was a coincidence, you know. And then it like kept happening. And then I was like, this is really suspicious. Like when I'm looking for time off, people cancel or reschedule. And that was just like the beginning of it, of like noticing the coincidental energy between I'm thinking something or I speak it, and then it comes into reality. And I think that just took me on this journey of going deeper and deeper with bioenergy and understanding that the world is reflecting our consciousness back to us. And so as we go through this journey, some of the things I wanted to talk about tonight was identifying the emotional and mental blocks. So identifying emotional mental blocks that can be recycling or regurgitating or coming around again and again for us. And then also breaking free from the past, you know. So the past has a way of like can keep us trapped or can keep us held back, or, you know, the past will always repeat itself. It's one of the processes of energy, is the past always repeats itself. But if we react to the past from the same vibration, we're going to get the same result. And if we respond to the past from a different vibration, then we actually go on a new path, you know. So there's a wonderful saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. You know, so if we want to have different experience, sometimes we have to do things different. And in order to do things different, we might have to identify the emotional, or sorry, I'm just adding some people here, the emotional or mental blocks that can be trapping us in this, like reliving this past experience. And then tonight I'll finish off with increasing our energy and vitality, because I think, like, in terms of increasing our energy and vitality, it's really, that's what healing offers people, right? Like, healing is about returning to your health and well-being, returning to that vital force, that vital energy. And you know, in some ways, as amazing as the medical system can be, it isn't always about the creation of health. It's more about treating illness and sickness. And so we also have to shift our consciousness away from, you know, only treating illness and sickness, but also create the creative process of creating energy and vitality and well-being, because otherwise we get trapped in that illness and sickness. And you kind of see that in many ways with corporate systems, you know, whether it's your visa you're paying off every month, or your mortgage you're paying off every month, or your medicines you're taking every day or every week, they kind of keep you looping around again and again. And so the kind of this concept, or this idea of being unencumbered by baggage, is really returning to freedom, and that freedom is always here. That freedom is always available to us, just as the present moment is always here. It's never somewhere else, right? The present moment, it's always here. You don't have to go very far to find it. And I know in many ways we might see ourselves, like, we often talk about, if you're, you know, if you're thinking a lot about the past, right? Like, if you're always thinking about the past, you know, sometimes that will lead to depression. But also, if you're always thinking about the future, you know, that can really lead to anxiety. So we sometimes get trapped between depression or anxiety because of our lack of really being present. And at the same time, the present moment is always here. Like, even if you went to an ashram in India, the present moment is there. But if you go home, the present moment is there. It's always wherever you are in this now. And so it's not as hard to find as we might think it is. It's just that we don't generally embrace it, or we don't generally receive it, but it's always here. It's always here, available, whether we receive it or not. And so, yeah, well, that's our warm up anyway. That'll start us out. Let me just grab some water. So I guess, like, you know, with 30 years of doing bioenergy healing and helping people recover their health, I've always thought of healing as, like, helping people come out of pain. That was always my initial like passion for it, or intention for it, was to help people come out of pain and suffering. Because I think as human beings, you know, we're empathic beings. We feel each other's pain, you know, whether we deny it or not, we feel each other. And maybe some more than others, but I think that every human being has the capacity to feel pain, to feel suffering. And if you have the capacity to relieve yourself of your pain and suffering, if you have, without like killing yourself, but if you have the capacity to still be alive and really and get out of your pain and suffering, you know, some people think like a spiritual path, well, you know, it's very easy to be on top of a mountain and not feel pain and suffering and just enjoy the view, right? Like, it's very, I think it's a lot easier if you're living in a place that is taking care of you, and everything is provided for you, and you're just meditating all day, well, of course, it's very easy to be a spiritual being. But try being a spiritual being in a relationship, in a job, with children, with children that sometimes don't talk to you or shout at you, or partners that, have real life experiences of one day they're feeling great and the next day they're feeling down and depressed. And, life isn't always giving us, this lukewarm water. Sometimes life is giving us hot water, not to hurt us, but to bring out who we are, to overcome our challenges, to really get to know ourselves. And sometimes I love this idea of getting to know yourself through positive experiences, but it's also true to say that sometimes we get to know ourselves through our suffering, right? And with that said, it's like we also have the capacity to transcend suffering, and that capacity is inside of us. That capacity is us. And so as we start to transcend our pain and suffering, it's natural. I think it's super natural that we want to do it for other people. We want to help other people come out of their pain and suffering, and show people like that. Yeah, life can be hard, life can be challenging, and it's all of those things, and it's also beautiful and magical and wonderful, and it's all of those things as well. But that there's also ways in which we can experience it all without losing ourselves. There's ways in which we can come back to the center. We come back to our center. We come back into, I use this term, come back into a right relationship with the self. And as we come back into a right relationship with the self, the suffering begins to end, and that to me was like this incredible realization as I was doing healing on people. The first thing that kind of started with doing healing on people was I was really looking to help them get out of their pain. And as people started letting go of their physical pain, of course, their sense of well-being went up. And I realized, the beauty of healing is you're helping people to, the quality of their life is so much better. We're here for, who knows how long we're here for, right? But while we're here, what's the quality of your life? And, over the years, working with thousands and thousands of people, multiple countries, multiple cultures, it's so interesting how people have the same stuff. And I've mentioned it here on these webinars multiple times, and I'll say it again because I think you can never hear truth enough, and sometimes you need to hear it a few times for it to really resonate. But one of the biggest things that I found working with people is really just bringing people back to self-love. That this lack of self-love, this lack of valuing oneself, and not in a not in a negative or an egoic way, but just simply loving yourself. Like, there's nothing egoic about simply loving yourself and valuing yourself and accepting yourself. And really, until we return to love and acceptance and grace with ourselves, it's very hard really to have it for other people, because the experiences that we interact and have with other people are usually a reflection of the emotional and mental blocks that we're carrying inside of us. So we play them out with other people. And so one of the things that I found was that when I'm working with people was that what really we see like blocked energy is blockages in the energy system. So blockages in the energy system means that perhaps the energy is supposed to flow freely through the body, but sometimes it gets blocked. And that can be a physical block, as in back pain or migraines or arthritis or multiple sclerosis or digestive problems. That can be a physical block. but also realizing over the years working with so many people that every physical block also had emotional block, also had mental blocks, and really realizing that you couldn't separate them, that we're not just physical beings, but we're emotional beings and mental beings as well. And then also identifying that not only does physical pain cause people suffering, but emotional pain, you know, can even cause greater suffering than physical pain. You know, the grief, regret, guilt, shame, fear, you know, to mention just a few of the emotions, as well as, of course, we have, you know, joy and happiness and bliss and all of the good things, and trust and love. But we also, you know, what comes with that, we also have fear and guilt and shame and grief and regrets. And what I found was that although we have those things inside of us, they're for us to experience, but not to hold on to. And as human beings, we have a tendency that in some way we've learned to hold on to things. Like we hold on to things very easy, you know, like I had this person who was like, they were talking about someone that cut them off in traffic, but they weren't angry at them. And as she was talking about the person that cut her off in traffic, she said, you know, but I'm not angry at them anymore. And she raised her voice when she said it. And I said, well, it actually sounds like you might be still angry with them. And she's like, no, I'm not. That was like 2 years ago. And I'm thinking, I feel like you're still angry at them, even though it was 2 years ago. That's someone cutting you off in the at a roundabout, right? Like someone cutting you off, you can be angry at them for still thinking about it 2 years later. That's crazy. But that's what, you know, in some ways, like, you know, we're wonderful, magical, beautiful beings, but we're also crazy as well. And we're, you know, sometimes we are our own worst enemy, you know, like I really seen that, you know, over the years when, you know, even helping someone recover who's been sick for 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, the solution in some ways, like, is always the same: releasing the blockages out of the body. And where do those blockages come from? Well, they can be physical, emotional, or mental blocks. But who's the owner of those blocks? And it's always the person who comes in for the session. But everyone who comes in for the session is often convinced that those blocks are coming from other people, or from past experiences, or from circumstances they've been in. And they'll be like, well, the reason I'm sick is because of my parents. The reason I have problems is because of my boss in work. My problem is my relationship. You know, it's always something outside of them. The reason my back is bad is because I've been in a car crash. You know, I'm like, well, when was that? And they're like 10 years ago. And what I've come to understand is, if you're sick for 10 years, whatever happened has come and gone. The only thing still holding on to it has to be you. You're encumbered, you know, you're encumbered by baggage, which is different than unencumbered. You're encumbered by baggage. You're holding on to stuff. You're burdened, right? And so we carry our burdens, our emotional burdens, our mental burdens. We carry them, we repeat them. And don't worry, like, even if you get rid of people in your life, you'll find new people to repeat your burdens with, right? You know, if you don't deal with your stuff will keep coming up. It'll keep dealing with you, you know? So you either have to deal with your stuff, or your stuff keeps dealing with you. But let's just say your stuff never goes away. Like when people say, like, I thought I was done with this. If you think that your stuff goes away, you're thinking in the wrong way, right? That just causes more suffering, right? When you think like, well, why is this still happening to me? This should, one, you think this shouldn't be happening. So whenever you have an idea that something shouldn't be happening, you're fighting with reality. Why? Because it is happening, right? So putting energy into this shouldn't be happening is really causing you suffering, because anything that's happening is happening. It's already happening. So, you know, one of the ways of getting out of suffering is acceptance, right? Accepting that it is happening. And then the next part is, well, if I accept that this situation is happening and I stop fighting with it, in a weird way, are you ready? It starts to leave. Because things stay in your life because you keep feeding them. You keep putting fuel on them. And think about a fire. As soon as you take the fuel off the fire, you know, as soon as you stop putting logs on the fire, you're out camping. You're on your camping adventure, and you brought some logs, you know, and you put the logs on the fire, and the fire just keeps burning. And as long as you put logs on the fire keeps burning. But what happens when you're ready to go to bed, you stop putting the logs on the fire and the fire starts to burn out, you know. And life is like that, you know. It's like we put so much fuel on our past experiences and then wonder why they're still there 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, why the past is following us, right? If it can feel like the past, you know, it's following you. Well, yeah, it is, because you're bringing it with you. You're carrying it forward. You're fueling it, you know. So it's, you know, it becomes your burdens. You know, we carry it forward, right? Like there's some sort of investment that we have in our pains. And I sometimes think, and I know this sounds like a crazy statement, but sometimes I think we're getting more out of being sick than being healthy, you know, because that's why it's still there. Because if you're getting more out of being healthy than being sick, you'll let go of it. But if you're getting more out of being sick by being, it's like a weighing scales, right? If you're getting more value out of being sick, and I did a whole webinar on, you know, what some of the reasons, like 5 reasons that keep people sick, and everything from the financial to the emotional to the power and control, you know, to even not getting other illness. So some people will hold on to illness. Maybe they hold on to headaches because as long as they have headaches, well, at least they don't have cancer, you know. So sometimes we carry these like emotional blocks or unconscious blocks or ways that we hold on to stuff. Is that making sense? Thank you for all the head nodding. Okay, so now we come back to identifying emotional and mental blocks. Like, how do we identify emotional and mental blocks? And I have a really easy way to identify emotional and mental blocks. And you know, when I said to you that the woman, like, she raised her voice and she's like, I'm not angry at them anymore. You know, it's like when someone says, you know, I'm not angry at my family anymore, you know, and they say it in an angry way. The term there is simply they're triggered. Right? So when people are triggered, you know, when you feel triggered, now what does triggered mean? You feel activated, you feel defensive, you know. So when you get defensive, and what do we do when we get defensive? We usually justify, you know. So how do we do that? Well, we justify why we are the way we are. We justify why we're not getting better. We justify why we can't let go of something. We justify why we're still putting fuel on the fire that we want to go out. You know, we justify. And when we justify, we're not receiving. You know, we're fueling the past. We're reacting to the past. And the reaction is like unconsciously, we're fueling the past over and over. And then, of course, we wonder why the past is following us, unconscious of the fact that we're reacting in such a way that is fueling it, that is keeping it alive, you know. So one of the ways that I often identify, you know, how we're holding on to stuff is simply that we get triggered when something is said to us. So if someone says something to you and you feel triggered, there's probably some truth in what they're saying, right? So if someone says something to you and you don't feel triggered, it's like maybe it's like it's integrated and you understand something. But if you feel triggered, you know, we'll just say it's a negative thing, a negative experience where the negative emotion comes up and you feel defensive, there could be some truth in there's something that needs to be healed there. There's something that needs to be released. There's some anger or some guilt or some shame. And so then you go into defense mode. So whenever we go into defense mode, we activate the solar plexus chakra. We activate the power center. And so in terms of like language that you've heard so many times, we activate the ego. And so the ego, when the ego gets activated, we become very defensive. We shut down, we close down, we withdraw, we pull back, we go into passive anger, or we just attack the other person, you know? So, but this reaction is our wounding. And one of the ways that the difference between like a trigger reaction and something that is integrated is that when we've integrated things, we tend to be more, and the term I would use is more responsive. So we respond to things. So we could say like when we react to things, it tends to happen really fast. Have you ever noticed that? Like you react and then afterwards you're like, when you have time to slow down and think about it, you're like, oh, why did I react that way? But when you react, it's automatic. So it's very fast. But when we respond to things, it's like there's more space. It's like there's more time. And when you respond, when you're not reacting, but you're not reacting, which means you're responding, it's like you have time to think and feel, you know, feel into, is this right? Is this wrong? Does this resonate with you? And you have time to experience something and to identify like, oh, is this something I want to do? Or is this not something I want to do? And so our response often means that we're more present. We're present to the experience of what's happening in the current moment reality. Whereas reaction tends to be fuel from the past. It tends to be fuel from the past and it's very fast. And response is kind of more slow. You know, so that's like when, you know, often if people get angry, it's often quick too, right? Like that, even when you think of someone like in road rage, they react very quickly, you know, and I always say it's like if you cut someone off and they get angry, it's you know, it's usually not that they're angry because you cut them off. It's, you know, maybe they're 5 years of age or 7 years of age and they've gone back to that wound to bring it to the surface. So the things that are inside of us that are unresolved, the burdens that are unresolved, they keep coming back around again and they keep showing up again and again and again. So just like the anger, you know, if something happened when you were 5 or 7, that unresolved childhood wounds, then even if you're 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or you could be 70 years of age driving your car, and that trigger will, if you haven't released it, really that trigger is from when you were 5 years of age maybe, and it lasts that long. It continues on in a person's life, you know. So identifying emotional and mental blocks, I would say like the easiest way to identify blocks is, and it doesn't have to be just about like identifying it for other people, but really identifying it within yourself. Is this triggering me is a great question. And if you can like be honest with that, like, oh my God, I feel triggered right now. Oh, now here's the formula, and this is pure. This is us living in pure consciousness. Somebody triggers you. Are you ready? You say thank you to them. Oh, someone triggers you and you say thank you. Thank you for showing me that I have a wound here. And that's very, very different than I'm not triggered. Feck off. You know, it's very, very different, because when you reject it, you're destined to repeat it. everything that you reject, you repeat, but also from a reaction. So you never quite get to unhook yourself from it. But now what happens when we start to slow down and we start to notice, oh my God, I'm feeling a reaction. I'm feeling a reaction, meaning I'm getting triggered here. Someone says something to you and you feel triggered. And instead of reacting, you're just feeling that you're triggered. And instead of rejecting it or denying it or reacting in a past pattern, the first thing you do is you just slow down and you start to just feel it. And then you say to the person, thank you. Thank you. You're showing me I feel triggered about what you said. I mean, who says that to anybody? Right? Oh, thank you for that. Like, people are confused. They're like, what? I said that to deliberately hurt you. It's like, I know, but hurt can only come from inside of me. And you're showing me where I still have a wound. Well, of course, they're God-founded, right? But it's like, your wounds are not about anybody else. Anyone that, you know, I mentioned this wonderful teacher, Anthony DeMello, like this, one of the probably the most like influential book I read in my whole life, that I've read more times than any other book. The one that I feel like really started on my journey, this book Awareness by Anthony DeMello. And there's a statement in it. And the statement is, my only guru is the one who disrupts me, because they tell me something about myself that I need to change. You know, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that so beautiful? My only guru is the one who disrupts me. You know, you could say teacher, you know, my only teacher, my only guru is the one who disrupts me, because they're telling me something about myself that I need to change. You know, and so Anthony Mello, he was giving a talk, and he was talking about, you know, some of these ideas about that we have these reactions to others, and this person kind of stood up and kind of like was arguing with him, and he said, you know, he just shouted out to the person like, sit down, you fool, you know, and in this big auditorium of people. And the person got really irate and, like, you know, got really angry. And then Anthony Mello, then he switched and he said, look, I'm really sorry. I don't know what came over me. I apologize. And then the person calmed right down, went completely down. And then when the person was calm, he said, do you not see that I just brought you to the highest levels of anger and then brought you completely back down again? And we do that to each other. We bring people up and we bring people down like a roller coaster. That's why it's the carnival of life. That's why it's a circus. Because when we interact with each other, we trigger each other, we push each other's buttons, we challenge each other, you know, and we bring each other to these places where we suffer, right? And so then what's this idea of awakening is realizing that the suffering is not coming from outside, but it's actually coming from inside. And that the people outside of us, or the situations or the circumstances, are bringing our wounds to the surface. And as we release and let go of those wounds, then you find that your triggers start to disappear, you know, and the triggers start to dissolve. And I've always said, like, you know, when people are doing healing and they're doing the work on themselves and they're doing sessions and they're doing training and they're deliberately making the effort to, like, release and heal the childhood wounds and release the past, and it sounds funny, but clear out your chakras, right? Because that's where we store everything. The chakras are the warehouses where we store our pain, where we suppress it down in the body. See, it gets held in the body on the cellular level, but it's through the chakras. And so the chakras are the storehouses. If we clear it out of the chakras, the body itself, the cells of the body will release it, because the cells are always renewing themselves. So the cells are not actually, even though memory, like when we think of illness and sickness, can be in the body for years and years, it's not entirely true. It's not that illness stays in the body, but illness is projected and repeated back into the body year after year. Illness gets repeated back into the body, but there has to be somewhere where the imprint and the memory of that is being held. And what it is, it's being held on a blueprint level in your electromagnetic field, in an emotional and a mental part of your electrical and your magnetic field is what's holding the memory of the past, is what's holding the wounds. Sorry, just someone coming in here a little late, but still welcome. So as we start to clear out the energy system and we start to flush out the system of the body, one of the things that people will often say, and this is probably the most common thing that people say after receiving healing, is, some people will feel the energy, right? And people will feel energy moving them and moving through their body. They might feel heat, cold, tingling sensations. And then there's other people who they don't feel anything at all, but their pain might disappear. But usually the one thing that everyone says at the end of sessions is, Michael, I don't know what you did, but I feel so much lighter and so much freer. And what that is it's their electromagnetic energy field, which is storing the emotional and the mental energy that is detoxing, that is being flushed out and cleared out of the system. And when the mental and emotional system is cleared out, it's like we have more space to breathe, more space to move, more space to feel. And we have more space and we have more time, and we have more time to respond, So this idea of identifying emotional mental blocks is really about creating space so that we have space to respond to the past rather than react to the past, and I feel really that's what healing does. Healing moves us out of the triggers by shifting us from reaction to response. And because so much of it is unconscious, it would be really great if we could do it by ourselves, but sometimes we need help, we need support. And when we're together, and this is the beauty of the collectiveness, is when we share ideas and we reflect concepts back to each other, then we sometimes will hear something that's like, oh, that just makes so much sense. Or yeah, I tend to react and I feel like I'm responding after a situation is all over, but I'm not responding when a situation is happening. And then as people go through their healing and they find now that they feel lighter, they feel freer, and now they have space. And then in that space is like time moves slower. And I call that more presence. That's really all it is. It's not really this weird, ram of possibility. It's simply the more present we are, because their wounds are leaving our body, the more present we are, the more responsive we are to responding to things from now rather than responding from things from the past, So what comes with that then is like, well, again, how do we now break free from the past? How do we break free from the looping, right? That looping effect. And really, like that answer to that is this like slowing down process, like, so this process of really calming the energy system down, switching the nervous system from the sympathetic back into the parasympathetic. So in terms of most people are living in a more sympathetic driven nervous system, which means that you're always on the defensive, right? You're always on the defensive, right? Like, people say to me, like, something happened in the family and they reacted, they were shouting and stuff, and they're like, how do they break that? How do you stop that and get out of that? And I found like that really that's what the value of healing is, right? Like that's what healing is. It's really slowing us down and resetting the nervous system, really bringing us back into a harmonious sympathetic and parasympathetic. And the sympathetic is the fight and flight, but it's also the freeze. So, when we have stress and we stop breathing or we freeze, like we're in more of that sympathetic state, right? So when we're in anxiety, when we're in that like stressful state, the reason we don't find solutions is because we're moving too quickly, we're moving too fast. But you think about it, like anybody, say someone who's having a panic attack, like one of the easiest ways as a practitioner to bring someone out of a panic attack is to just simply sync up your breathing with their breathing, and then start slowing your breathing down. And then you start to entrain the person to your breathing, and then they literally come out of the panic attack. And that's like how, like, this is what our systems are made for. Our systems are made to co-regulate each other, right? Our systems are made, like someone who is stressed can become calm just by being with someone who's calm. Someone who is ill can become healthy by simply being with the healer, by simply coming into that resonance, that frequency, that vibration, and it's like, people say to me, well, I suffer with chronic fatigue. I've got low energy. I've got aches and pains all over my body. And I've had this for 8 years. And, everyone, I go to, like in the chronic fatigue society, they're all the same way. And we've all tried everything and nothing works. And we support each other. And, they often say, well, why am I not getting better? And I'm thinking, well, it's the definition of insanity. It's literally the definition of insanity. You're in that vibration, you're in that frequency, you're in that reactive state. You're always reacting to the pattern, right? And so healing is really it's about interrupting the patterns, right? Like that's what it is. It's about interrupting the past. It's about interrupting the future. It's about the healing is really about breaking these patterns and cycles, repetitive patterns, interrupting the unconscious, and coming into awareness and coming into like responsiveness. And really, I sometimes think that's what consciousness is, right? Like if I'm reacting to something, that's happening unconsciously. But if I'm responding to something because I've got the time to identify it and respond to it, then I would say that there's more consciousness in my awareness around that situation. And so one of the ways that you can measure, right? You can measure your healing process, so it will just say if you're going to a healer and you want to measure your success, right? You want to measure it. Well, obviously, if it's physical pain, that's very easy to measure. If your average pain is a level 7 or a level 8, and you go and have healing sessions, if your average pain is still a level 7 or level 8, well, there's been no improvement. So it's very measurable. But now if you, after going and having a few sessions, and now your average pain is 0 and you have no pain, right? Well, now that's very measurable, right? You can measure when pain goes up and you can measure when pain goes down. And I mean, even first response, like ambulance workers, Well, when they arrive on the scene, they'll ask the person, hey, what's your level of pain on the scale of 0 to 10? Now, maybe if the pain is at a 10, maybe they're not able to express that, but it's like they measure the level of pain to try to get a sense of like, you know, if they've got a problems around the stomach or the appendix area and it's at a 10, well, okay, maybe that's more serious, right? It could be a burst appendix. And so that's very serious. But if the pain is a 7, it's really bad, but it's not excruciating. Well, you know, then they'll have a different reaction or a different response to that. So pain is very measurable on that scale. Like physical pain can be measured. So with healing, you can measure if people are improving. It's very measurable. I don't know if that's the engineer in me, but like you can measure it, right? Now, then in terms of emotional, how do you measure emotional and mental wounding, right? Well, in terms of I don't generally put like the emotional pain necessarily on the scale. I mean, you could do for sure, but what I tend to find is like with the triggers, if you have something that repeats, that something that you know triggers you, someone says something and you know, it's sometimes like family are the ones that might trigger you easier than people you don't know, right? But if you have a particular person who normally says a particular thing that particularly triggers you, and then one day you realize that they say the same thing in the same way and you're not triggered, I think that's a really good measure that you've released that emotional trigger. Because now you're in the same situation, because remember, everything repeats. But the same situation repeats, but you're not triggered. And so that's a really good sign of your emotional well-being, your emotional healing, you know. Another one with the kind of mental energy I find is like when the brow chakra is blocked, the tendency is like we are our own worst enemy with our thinking. Like we do a thing that I call clustering. So if you're thinking in a negative way, have you ever noticed how negative thinking leads to more negative thinking? It's like we globalize it. We take something small and then we make it bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And so thoughts tend to vibrate at similar frequencies. So when we have negative thoughts, they tend to cluster and we tend to get more of them and we can go into like this negative spiral, right? And so one of the things that I found is that the clearer the brow chakra is, so when we clear out the brow chakra, it's not that people don't think, like that's something just simply that we do. I always say, like when people say like, Micah, can you help me stop thinking? I'm like, no, you know, that's something that you do. That's what we do. And it's not about not thinking. I think it's more about the quality of your thoughts. Because you can have thoughts that really support you, you know, and add value to your life and that give rise to beautiful conversations and that are affirmations to love of another person, right? Like even one of the love languages that we spoke about on the last webinar, words of affirmation are sometimes people's love language. So thoughts are necessary. We're intellectual beings. It's not about getting rid of the intellect and just simply opening the heart. It's about a balanced intellect and heart chakra. It's about bringing the two together. So what if our thoughts are filtered through the heart? So now our thoughts are loving versus if our thoughts are filtered through our wounds, right? Our thoughts are wounded, right? So when people react to things, it's really coming from a wound. It's coming from their pain. It's coming from their suffering. So really, as healers, as teachers, we're really, you know, you can't force things on people, but what you can do is you can, in the most beautiful, loving way, is simply we look to reflect people's patterns back to them. you know. And one way that I sometimes do that is I'll just say to someone, look, is that coming from a wound or is that coming from your heart? You know, so when somebody says something about somebody else, that's an easy way, right? So if someone says something about someone else or something that's happened to them, look, is that coming from a wound or is that coming from your heart? And just by slowing down and introducing something like that, but like it's taken me years to understand the power that your words at the right time in the right space can have over someone. Because if someone can come into this, in bioenergy, we call it the self-realization. So rather than me telling someone what their problem is, if they can see it themselves, they can unhook themselves from the unconscious patterns. And so the work of the practitioner, the healer, is to have an understanding of the thought process, of the emotional process, and to be able to reflect it back to their clients, back to their students, to be able to help them unhook themselves from the past, to unhook themselves from the reaction. And then, as I said, the measure of that is that as people are progressing along in their healing journey, they find, oh my God, I was in the same situation as a few weeks ago and I'm not triggered, And what comes with that is sometimes a knowing that I'm not going to be triggered with, I might be triggered with other stuff, right? Because I have more than one wound, but I'm not going to be triggered with that wound anymore, And then in fairness, all the different wounds, they all actually filter back into one wound, which is a lack of self-love. And so healing is really returning people back into right relationship with the self, back to love, a return to love, So then we're coming to the end of our talk. But in terms of the last part, this increasing your energy and vitality, for years, like I would find, like when you release people's physical pain, when you release their emotional pain, people would say, Michael, one of the things that the bioenergy did for me is I have so much more energy and so much more vitality. And in fairness, I did not give the people more energy, right? Because that would drain me, right? I didn't give anyone more energy or more vitality. The only thing I was doing was taking the blocks out of the way, helping people take their blocks out of the way. Now, yeah, it'd be great if people could do it themselves, but we have a blind spot to our own blocks, right? So that's why, it's almost like sometimes you hear these statements, you have to do it all on your own. I don't know that that's helpful. I think that sometimes it's good to do stuff on your own, absolutely, right? Like it's good to do your self-work, absolutely. But doing your self-work doesn't mean you have to do it by yourself, right? You can do your self-work, but you can work on yourself, but with other people. It makes it so much easier. It makes it so much better. It makes it so much more enjoyable. But it's also so much faster, so much more effective, right? Because we learn and we grow through each other's experiences, So then coming back in terms of increasing energy and vitality, I don't think it's something like you twist someone's ear and their energy and vitality increases. I firmly believe, after like working 30 years as a bioenergy healer, that energy and vitality is your body's natural state. And so really we're just returning to the natural state. We're not increasing energy and vitality. And so there's almost like a falsehood about increasing energy vitality, because we're so conditioned to get energy from outside sources, right? I mean, you can get energy from shopping, you can get energy from coffee, you can get energy from Red Bull, you can get energy from, I don't know if it's true, but I heard something like that there was 13 spoons of sugar or something in a can of Red Bull. And I'm like, well, no wonder people get energy if they're getting 13 spoons. You know what your normal per day should be 1 teaspoonful of sugar, or no, sorry, like 25 grams of sugar a day would be like, should be your max, right? That's probably like 5 teaspoonfuls over the whole day. But I mean, people can, you can eat processed food, and you go way past that with just one meal or one food that you eat. So there's a lot of like false senses of energy that we get. But what I've always found is that's why people get these highs and lows. You get a false spike of energy. So you have your coffee and your muffin with all the sugar, you get this false spike of energy. But how are you an hour later? You're like completely drained, right? So as we start to detoxify those things out of our system, we get our energy system working better. We return to our natural state of energy. You don't need any of those things to have energy, right? Look at a baby. Like when you think of a baby or a child, they're so full of energy. Like when they're awake, they're fully awake. They're fully in the energy. And then when they sleep, they're gone. They just like fall asleep. They're not like an adult, like maybe taking ages to fall asleep. And, kids are awake or they're asleep, and they let you know. And dogs are the same, right? Like when a dog is like, when it's awake, it's full of energy and it wants to go, and it has these cycles, right? Like cycles where it's full of energy and running around, and then it's resting, and full of energy and running around, and then it's resting. And I think of that as like, the ebb and flow, or contraction and expansion, contraction and expansion. And I think that that's our natural way, is that when we like listen to our body, when we need to rest and we need to nap and we need to just shut out the world for a while, when we respect that and we shut down, the body restores itself really quickly. When we sleep, like when you're in alignment, sleep is your body knows how to sleep. When you sleep, your body should completely recover, renew, replenish, refresh itself, right? When you wake up the next day, you should be fully energized, fully ready to go. Look at a child. A child wakes up in the morning and they're ready to scream at their lungs, right? I think as parents, we've all had those experiences where you go running into your child at 6 a.m. because they're screaming. And as soon as you run in, they're like, they start laughing or they start smiling, and you're like, their screams sounded like they were dying, but they were really just like basically what a child is saying: I'm awake and I'm ready for life. Where are you? Feed me, play with me, because they're in that moment, they're there, they're present, right? And so life is offering us vitality and energy and connectivity and expansion and all of the things, right? And in some ways we've tried to like take life, and I don't know, it's like it's kind of a way that we do things of like we domesticate, right? As human beings, we domesticate, and we try to domesticate. We even domesticate ourselves. I'm going to do this now. I'm going to go to work at 9 and finish work at 5 and go home and eat, and then I sleep, and then I wake up and I go and I do. And I don't know really that's the creativity and the expression that really the body wants to have, and so when we learn to go with the ebb and flow, and we learn to move with the rhythms and the waves and the patterns and the cycles, then we achieve a lot more with a lot less effort, and so there's times where we're being asked to rest. There's times where we're being asked to shine and illuminate, and usually they're separate, right? Because when you take time to go inwards, we call that the contraction. When you take time to go inwards and restore yourself, then the next phase of energy is expansion. And then you go and you illuminate. Then you go and your light shines, you know? And so after you shine your light and you uplift, you know, and you inspire, then what's the next phase? It goes back to contraction. But people think you should be high energy all the time. And that's not how nature works. That's not how the patterns, rhythms, and cycles work. And so when we start to learn and understand the cycles of energy, and we start to sync ourselves with the cycles of energy, then there's times where we go in and we withdraw and we recluse and we learn and we grow. And then there's times where we open and expand and share and illuminate and glow, you know. And so coming back full circle, you know, our talk tonight is called Unencumbered by Baggage, right? Unencumbered, to be no burdens, without burdens, to be burdenless, to be unburdened. And so really that's, you know, when people say, well, why do we do healing? We do healing to unburden ourselves. We do healing to come into alignment with our spirit. We do healing to come into alignment with nature and our nature. We do healing to come into alignment in relationships with each other, but also with our body. We do healing to release and let go and unburden ourselves from the past, from the wounds, from the triggers. You know, why do we do healing? To let go, to put all the garbage down, to put the baggage down. We do healing to put the bags down and to free ourselves. And then when people say to me, Michael, should I do healing or should I do training? And I always say, do both. Do both. Like, why would you do healing? You do healing to put the baggage down. Why would you do training? You do training so that you don't pick it up again. Right? And that's what it is, you know, because unless we need to educate, not medicate, right? Unless we really educate ourselves on these raw natural principles of nature, unless we come back in and we unlearn all of this garbage that we're filling ourselves up with, and we come back to nature, we come back to the natural, until we unlearn, life is going to keep, like the pendulum, it's going to keep going back and forth, because it's trying to break us free from all of the baggage, from all of the burdens. I sometimes think, like, you know, as we're progressing through this carnival, you know, it's about finding that balance, finding that inner balance, that inner light, your inner glow, your inner way. And to me, really, that's what healing is. It's just really helping people to find themselves, to come back to themselves. I hope that you've gotten a few golden nuggets tonight. I hope that you can take something away with you, some booms maybe. And you know, words like these words that we speak in these conversations that we share, you know, I think of them like seeds, right? They just like a seed, it's like planting ideas, new thoughts that can grow and bring you in a different direction, can bring you on a different path, can change, you know, your course into a beautiful new blossoming journey. And so may these words and these ideas and these thoughts, may they resonate and vibrate through your soul, your body, your mind and spirit, and may they bring you into alignment. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. If you're on YouTube and you want to check out my work, if you go to the description, you'll find a link to Linktree that I offer in-person sessions in Vancouver. I offer distant healing sessions no matter where you are in the world. I offer workshops and courses. We have a workshop coming up in October, a level 1 bioenergy training, where you can learn bioenergy for yourself, to do it for yourself, family and friends. I offer healing evenings where we combine bioenergy and breath. That's in person in Vancouver, where you can come and do healing and breathing, and that's a great way for, we'll say, unburdening yourself and getting really deep down into the pain body and healing it and releasing it. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to stop recording, and hopefully we'll see you next week.